Is this the boss here? Yeah. How you doing, Jen? How are you? Nice to see you. I miss you in Hamilton. They miss you too.
Oh, that's really nice when you say that.
Can you mute yourself?
I miss the Pattons. Yeah. The library. There you're both right there. Yeah.
No, I am muted.
Grover's not bad. We got a good guy in the Conservation Commission.
Your sound is on.
Oh, that's fine. Let's just do that.
Did that do it? That sounds like it did.
Glasses.
I always, that's the last thing I think of too. I'm like, oh, my sound.
I just had a client where we're doing one of those owls, so that trying to look around at you. So I've been doing a lot of it recently where it's like, oh, you can put yourself and you can turn yourself down.
Yeah, yep, because the owl picks it up and then, yeah. Oh, that's. Are these both microphones? Like, do we need both of them?
Yeah, probably.
Because they might be feeding off of each other. Maybe not?
Yeah, we are without.
Does anybody else hear that?
I hear like a slight background noise, but hopefully that's gonna dissipate. Just checking, can somebody who's online just confirm that they can hear us and see us all right? I suppose you can't see us because there's no camera on.
You should be able to see the feed.
Oh, great.
There, I can hear you. There's a little bit of feedback, but it's better than when you first started, for sure.
Maybe.
Right as well.
Too much right now. We're going to do all the hybrid meetings. Is that in any way better or about the same?
Definitely better.
A little bit better. Great.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, with that, I think we're going to get started. It is 7 o'clock or just past. So nice to see those of you again who are back for a second time. This is, I will do some introductions to the team here in a second, but tonight certainly we'll be talking about 150 Center Street, Strawberry Fields. Tonight we are running this meeting both in person and virtual. There's a few participants joining us virtually. Some limitations with that, right? So we ask that you do your best when we're speaking to try to speak into the mic if you do have comments so that the folks online can hear and see. And then I'm going to be doing some awkward pauses and trying to make sure that the folks engaging virtually can hear and see us. If those folks who are joining virtually do have comments or questions, please feel free to jot them in the Q&A tab. We'll be monitoring that on the laptop in front of us. And the meeting is being recorded. I suppose that's a new thing updated from last time. Some quick tips for those of you joining remotely. I think most of us know how to do this at this point, but it's new to some, so muting and unmuting. Please feel free to turn your video on if you're speaking. Please feel free to chat in the chat if you have any clarifying questions. We'll try to go with the raised hand method, but it is a pretty small group, so we'd like to keep it pretty informal. So if you do have questions, please feel free. We do have some slides prepared, but tonight is, as you see in front of you, we've got some schemes that we want to share with you all. So the quick bit of introductions here tonight. We'll go through some of the introductions of the project, why we're here, what we're tasked to focus on. We'll share some of the community feedback. We've got, I think, close to 200 responses to the survey that's been up for the last 5 weeks or so. We will be going through some redevelopment scenarios of 150 Center Street and then talking through some of the zoning and market analysis pieces to talk about some of the limitations and benefits of what the town is able to do through zoning, and then what the next steps for the market analysis and fiscal impact assessment are. Then really it is kind of a small group huddle. I do want to make this kind of a continuation of last time, but also I really do want to hear your initial feedback and thoughts about what we've prepared, and then we'll report out and next steps. We will be reconvening again after this meeting. By way of introduction, I think many of you, if not all of you, know Rebecca. I think we need to do introductions. I think Annie might be joining us remotely tonight, maybe in a few minutes. This project is funded by a grant, a site readiness grant from Mass Development. And then the consultant team, my name is Brian Creamer. I'm a planner and project manager with Niche Engineering based out of Lawrence. With me tonight, I'll let you all introduce yourselves, if that's all right.
Hi, I'm Sydney. I'm with Niche Engineering. I'm a water resources designer / planner, and I'm helping with this one.
And I'm Emily, and I'm an urban planner and designer with Ennis Associates, so I'm also helping on this plan.
And then on Zoom this evening,
Hi, I'm Mo. I'm a planning analyst at Niche.
Hi, I'm Chris Ehrlich. I'm a senior planner and market analyst at RKG Associates.
thanks all. So by way of, sorry, I realize I'm standing in front of the big screen here, but so we started this project, around late March into April. We spent about 2 months learning about the site, taking a site walk, and learning more about the conditions on site. We learned about the site's history, the 2013 acquisition by the town. We held a community engagement session, really a listening session that first time. Wanted to hear from you about what you'd like to see, if anything, on the site. Since then, we've released a public survey, which I mentioned had several hundred, or over 100 responses. I think we're just under 200. And then here we are, about halfway through the process. We've got a little ways to go, but tonight is our opportunity to share with you what we've heard, what we've gleaned, and where and how that might be represented on the site. We'll be headed towards site refinement and then presenting again in the early fall. We have no dates tentatively or set for that yet. I think Groveland Day might be a really good opportunity to get the word out there about this and where this process ends up. So a bit about the project for those who weren't with us last time, but sorry for some of these that they might be a little bit repetitious. So 150 Center Street is a 61-acre site that the town of Groveland purchased in 2013, or just shy of $4 million. It was a former gravel and sand quarry attached to properties to the north. The town also owns the 3 parcels just to the north of here, as well as others that are continuous open space, mostly forested, and 150 Center Street itself has been used for recreational uses, some sports fields, and generally open space and trails for the last decade or so. We heard really loud and clear last time that there was a very specific set of reasons why the town decided to purchase the property in 2013. We understand you were faced with a 40B development, a residential development in 2006. What we're sharing there is what we learned actually since the last public meeting of the heavy interest and really the purpose for the purchase of the property being protect the Aquifer Protection District. We'll go through a little bit of that in a minute here, to promote and provide space for recreation uses. And quite frankly, to prevent the development of 100 or more homes on the site. It's a pretty rare thing for a town to have this kind of acreage that is not so encumbered, but a pretty great opportunity as well. I want to also speak through, if Emily, you don't mind sharing and joining me on this. This was an integral part of the comprehensive plan, which is wrapping up, and connections to this open space, the Valley Screw, and baseball fields nearby, and certainly the connection to Beezy, were a really important open space and natural resources portion of the comp plan. Anything to add on that?
Yeah, come up so the mic can hear me.
Thanks.
Even better, there's a car for you. So with the comprehensive plan, we looked at 3 very specific areas of Groveland to try and figure out what should happen to each of them. And 150 Center was one of those 3 areas. So it was part of the entire planning process. We understand, and I don't want to steal Brian's thunder, but we understand the purposes for which it was bought. But there was some information, some input from the public that there are other things that people would like to see. So this planning process is really following on from that to capture, okay, let's go more in depth into this area than you can do in a comprehensive plan. And that's really where Brian's going to take us today and further discussion from that.
Thanks. Would it be helpful if I use the mic?
Good, yeah. good. Oh.
Sure. Thanks. So I just wanted to clarify a little bit about who the players are and why we're here. Right? So the town of Groveland applied for a site readiness grant, which is a grant program put out by Mass Development back in January. I think is when they were awarded. Mass Development's Community One Stop for Growth site readiness grant is really heavily focused on looking for underutilized or underdeveloped properties for commercial and industrial development. That's the core function of the grant program. This is a relatively unique site for that grant program. You know, there are many of the other applicants in the last years, have been downtown sites with, not necessarily even brownfields, but just other sites that have some development already previously on them. This one's pretty unique in that it's, relatively completely undeveloped. And then we assembled this team, I think, specifically because of Emily's connection and knowledge of the town itself, RKG's really strong presence and understanding of the North Shore, of Groveland's economic possibilities, and really just the region's economic growth sectors. And then ourselves, we're engineers, we're planners. So a little bit of our work since the May 18th meeting has been looking at specifically infrastructure connections and feasibility of connecting the site to nearby water and sewer and gas, the logistics, the nuts and bolts of developing a site like this. What we've been tasked to do is really understand what opportunities and constraints exist on the site, to pull together what you're seeing in front of you tonight, redevelopment scenarios and zoning recommendations, if the town does want to change zoning from the industrial use that's there today. And really, I think the core of this process is to facilitate and understand what the community wants to see going forward. So with me, Cindy's going to share a bit about what we've heard to date. You have us?
Okay. Should I? Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. So in the previous meeting on May 18th, we heard some things, and one of the biggest ones on there was the concern for the aquifer protection. But we also heard feedback on what things people would like to see on the site, and that includes, a local grocery, farm stand, community/senior center, food and refreshments, some small recreation like shuffleboard and pickleball. And we did also hear that there's no need for larger recreation fields, but and also to maintain access to the community trail and maintain space for trails to still be on the site as well. Okay, so to address more of the concern about the aquifer protection, there is restrictions for Zone 2 on the site. There's prohibited uses and restricted uses, both of which we are not proposing. There's higher additional standards that Mass DEP requires for Zone 2 sites that will be followed throughout the process. That is not to say that no development is allowed on Zone 2 sites. These are examples throughout Groveland where they are within that Zone 2 Aquifer Protection District, where you see your typical residential, you'll see some commercial in there, some recreational fields. There's still development that is safe for the aquifer that still follows those Zone 2 requirements as proposed by Mass DEP. And then ways that we can follow those requirements and make sure that our water is filtered out as it runs off of those impervious surfaces like pavements and roofs. You employ green infrastructure practices to help filter out those contaminants in the water before it is allowed to infiltrate in the ground, before it even reaches the soils to the aquifer. So that'll help with filtering those out. Feedback that we heard from the survey, about 80%, more than 80% of people pass by the site, and 30% visit the site at least once a month. So it does get a lot of traffic, so this is a great opportunity to develop the site, bring more people to it, create a community feel in Groveland. A lot of people visit the site by personal vehicle, so there is still opportunity to integrate the trails more, bring people there more by bike and by walking, make it more of a multimodal transportation site. So we asked also in the survey to rank your priorities for the site, and these were 5 different priorities, and the first one that people put as number 1 is connection to the community trail, and to include that in the site. The second one is to see more generate municipal income through light manufacturing uses, and when we say light manufacturing, we mean things like a brewery, something that'll be more community feel, not, you don't think heavy industrial, no heavy industrial uses. 3 is develop commercial recreation with future expansion and infill opportunities. Number 4, interestingly enough, came in the community center, and then 5, the least one on people's list, was accessible community residential options. We also asked what is the current availability of amenities within the Groveland community and like immediately surrounding the Groveland community. So we heard that there was a lot of recreation fields, as you can see, the larger green. There's a lot of trails, business and office space, and accessible housing. But what we heard was there isn't a lot of is community commercial kitchens, spaces for startup businesses, a community center, community garden spaces. And then there was some that there's some options, but maybe they're not so great. And that's where the restaurants and brewery, the retail shops, yeah, those ones fall into. We also asked which of these amenities, after you rank them of what's available around in the community, which of these would you like to see on the site? So we heard a lot of the trails, restaurants and brewery. Not so much on the housing and business, office space, but definitely on the retail shops and the community garden as well.
Sorry, what's the color key there?
So the color goes, okay, so there is revenue generating, so that's green.
Okay.
Sorry. And then community public amenities is the blue. And then there's other, where people are able to give their own responses, and a few said tennis and pickleball courts, and hydroponic farming was on there as well.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah, no problem. So what are your greatest concerns for the sites? This was an open response question, so we made a word cloud with, you know, the highest words used in those open responses. And development, housing, increase in traffic, the aquifer is also on there, water was used a lot. Those are concerns. And then we also asked what should be fulfilled on the site. People want a sense of community. They want open space, small town, businesses, restaurants, trails. So in summary, as we've been saying, aquifer protection, trail network, and community center is top of the list. That's more of the community center, community feel ones, and then the revenue generating, we're hearing more of commercial restaurants, retail, light manufacturing like breweries. Okay. So we took those responses and we created site schemes for you guys to look at and review today, and Brian's going to go over those.
Before we jump on to these, any questions, any thoughts on the survey responses that you saw? Any of those rank true? Any major questions? Sure, happy to.
I mean, I think we have some cricket competitions some cricket competitions that happen over there. Like it's one of the few spaces they said at one of the town hall meetings where they can compete.
I knew it happened. I did not know if it was still going on, or if they still leased that space.
Yeah, they were given permission at one of the recent board meetings.
Okay. So I think you'll see in the schemes we've kind of left space for that. We're not going to specifically show a cricket field, but I think the space allocated for that is included in all of these, if that helps. But that's great to know. Yeah, please.
As a former water and sewer commissioner in town over the last 25 years, off and on, I want to make sure we protect the aquifer there very much to protect the town because it's very important to it.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate the comment. I'm going to move on to what you're seeing in front of you tonight. So I want to clear of what these are and are not. what we're tasked to do is come up with concepts. We are not developers. We're not coming in here proposing any of these developments. We're talking about what the community vision really wants to be. If the town were to go through an RFP process and look to developers to help with development of the site in the future. So we're not proposing these things. And I don't want this to come across as if what's on the page tonight is in any way a done deal, or even really moving forward past tonight. Most of these things, I want to hear your honest feedback, and I think we all do, about what is possible and what you really think is not appropriate for the site. So another important consideration, and kind of the last question of the survey, is how much, if any, of the site would you like to see developed at all? Taking out the 8 acres of the turtle nesting habitat, that conservation portion of the eastern portion of the site, 0 to 33% of the land was the highest response. So you're seeing 54% of the responses said between 0 and 33%. 33% of respondents said between a third and 2/3 of the site could be developed. And then about 13% of respondents said, it would be okay to develop even up to 2/3 to 100% of the site. Average response being in that, 1/3 of the site feels about right. That ends up being in the remaining 50, help me do math here, 61 minus 8, 50 or so acres is 17 or so acres of development, really tied to the core and the center of the site, keeping any development away from the turtle nesting habitat and away from the wooded sections, closest to the western portion of the site. It's also just where the site has the easiest access from Center Street. What you're seeing here in white is around an isolated vegetated wetland, and giving that at least 100, if not more, feet of buffer around it. So one way we could think about development on the site is to have and reinforce the front, right, and make this development, any development on the site, really address and be right on Center Street. What that might look like in the real world, one thing you might be familiar with is the Bockford Community Store and Kitchen. That sort of residential feel, but has a commercial aspect to it. Obviously, there's a post office in there. There's the kitchen. Maybe something like a small Aroma Joe's. I mean, I know we all know the type. There's a lot of impervious associated with that type of development. But I guess the point being here to help reinforce and address the street front itself. Tied to that could be something like we were hearing in the responses of a brewery, a performance space, an outdoor type dining experience, and then maybe a senior center type activity or a community garden type space towards the back of the site. That's heavily kind of focused on the street, and then community uses in the rear of the site in the center. Really trying to keep all of the development as close to the core as possible. Concept 2 is we're going to see more of tonight, what we want to talk a little bit about. Not that we're in any way favoring it, it just has the most mix of uses. So it's a little bit of have your cake and eat it too, where maybe a smaller portion of the site could be residential, and then a community hub, including a community center, commercial development around a central node inside of the site. But really forces you to enter the site as opposed to experience the site or any developments on it from Center Street itself, and then the potential for light industrial on the sort of eastern portion of the site. I think this one we also heard that a performance space or an open space that is essentially a public park with a gazebo or a pavilion type feel would be really welcome. And we think that actually might fit really nice in this scheme, but this is a wide mix of uses on the site. And then a third kind of scheme or concept is maybe this site, it does need more intense development, really maximize the tax revenue generation possible from the site itself. So looking to heavy commercial uses, I shouldn't say heavy, but more intense commercial uses, keeping the community hub generally where it is in that back center portion of the site, allowing you a gateway to the portion of the site to the north, and then allowing site light industrial type uses to be in proximity to the DPW yard and the other industrial properties on Center Street itself. Any of these feel like a clear favorite at this point? No way any of them are even possible. happy to talk through them. Maybe the best place to talk through them is at the tables. So what those types of uses might be is, potentially a small retail establishment, let's say a small grocery, a community center included, maybe even smaller business park type light industrial uses, and keeping a restaurant more core to the street itself. So we took a shot at all of these concepts and layouts, and concept 2 for us felt like the one that had the most varied uses, and we wanted to see what that might look like in multiple iterations or phases. So if we took concept 2 and just looked at the community uses portion of it, we've got a scheme here that we'll zoom into the portion of the main portion of it in a second, that really intensely puts development in the middle of the site. It retains, the east and western portions of the site is conservation, has a, local, about a half-mile or so loop internal to the site, has some light parking, has some pickleball courts, has some community garden spaces, but no revenue generation from this type of development, right? And this is probably, a heavy burden on the taxpayers. It doesn't really have a future in and of itself. If you were to add to this type of development, and we're going to go through these on the tables as well. If you were to add to this type of development, let's say a small, modest restaurant with an outdoor space, what might that outdoor space look like, and how does it benefit the residents of the community? We think centering that type of development around a performance space, maybe something that the community might be interested in having, could be really beneficial. So this is a relatively light touch portion. This is, about 94% of the site is continuously preserved as is, or, converted to more pasture meadow farmland as opposed to the scrub vegetation that's there today. And then sort of hides and puts any parking at the periphery of the development and allows this, central green to become its own space. Scheme 3 does introduce some housing onto the site. This is a modest introduction of housing. So this would be about 39 units, much smaller than the 40B that was proposed many years ago, but something to really enclose that open space, make the site a little bit more lively, have some folks live there, and activate that the commercial uses and small light industrial uses on site. So what you're seeing there is, let's say, a brew pub or a brewery, and a light manufacturing facility kind of tucked on the east portion of the site, in a very similar footprint to the other schemes. Similar parking layout as before, similar open green space as before, and no other introductions there. So with the introduction of, let's say, a full build-out, if we took concept 2 to its natural progression of limiting to the development to that core, 15 or so acres of land, there's a scenario where you could fit up to about 80 or 90 units within that space. That's still quite a lot of units, but it's a smaller footprint, right? So it's townhouse style development. There's some single family in there. There's some multifamily, largely multifamily, but still centered around the idea of a community space that is really for everyone as opposed to just the folks that live there. There's another scenario where that residential doesn't exist. We also heard pretty loud and clear from the survey that residential is not a preferential use of the site for most respondents. So that scheme still works, I think, for a commercial light industrial type use, right? So if that portion of the site remained around the same, geometries, but looked to smaller, light industrial type buildings that reinforce that edge and allowed that community space to remain, it is a way to do it without the residential. It retains a lot of the eastern portion of the site, as is. Those site development schemes essentially build on each other, right? So there's, scheme 1 having relatively light touch, very, very heavy in the conservation and, lack of development, all the way through scheme 4, which still only has about 25 or so % of the site developed, a little less. But that's what we want to talk through tonight. And open table, and we'll start putting pen to paper. maybe none of these feel right. Maybe some of them actually feel like they're in the right spot, but are a little bit too small, too big. We can certainly play with footprints and play with ideas for the site, but that's what we've heard and what we built on as part of the survey process. So, before we go too much further, any questions, thoughts on what we've got so far? Please.
I'm on a product to the property, and I've been involved in it since it was purchased. And I've always wanted to see the property stay where it was gonna be conservation, and also be able to generate money for the town. So, at one point in time, I was a selectman. We looked at selling off the lots on Center Street as commercial lots along the road to try and generate money for the town, sell it, lease it, whatever. My vision, and I'm only saying this is my vision, just something to let everyone hear,
Sure.
would be to turn around. If you did in Salem, Mass, you have the Pickering Loft. They have some little stores down below with some residential above type thing. And then keeping the walking trail and the rail trail around the property. So you're gonna incorporate tie the rail trail in and still keep it so people from the town can go in and walk around, go into the property and use it for exercise and what have you. But still, we're gonna generate some money out of it for the town to offset the taxes we seriously need.
Yep.
And we're gonna turn around and maybe we can design it toward, we're definitely need some elderly housing and more on that line, community housing for the elderly and what have you. They have no community center here, and we really needed one. So maybe we can take that picture and look at that picture as well, but try to hit everything you've talked about tonight and get one picture, but try to bring it all in at the same time. And I'm sure that's where everyone, this is my first meeting coming in. You know, I think we have to do this. Yes, keep the open space that was purchased for, keep the open trails and what have you, but we also got to look at this. I personally think that this town, we're going in a direction where our expenses are getting higher and higher and higher. We're outseeding what we can afford. Schools are our biggest part of our budget. Trash is the biggest part of our budget. And what do we have left to run the town on? Nothing. And every year it keeps going up and up. So we got to start looking at a bigger picture to try and preserve, but on the same token, bring in some revenue. And I'm not saying, I don't think, me as an abutter, I wouldn't want industrial back there, but like you were saying earlier, I could see maybe some shops, some little, shops or something where we could, maybe on the front side or whatever, we could, do something with some commercial, but not like manufacturing type thing, you know what I mean? So,
Thank you.
Okay.
That's really great feedback. I really appreciate that.
yeah.
Any other thoughts, please?
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement in terms of being heavily invested in the commercial, depending on what the market can bear. And the apartments above, especially being smaller, would supply some of that workforce. And I think that's important versus the single-family homes and the townhouses. Now, if the townhouses were 55 and above in an area, that would benefit Groveland, I think, overall, and give a lot more opportunities for others to stay in Groveland with the rising costs and things.
I just want to make sure I'm hearing you right. So let's say, too far back. Next to the townhouse layout there, but maybe residential above this first floor use. That's right, yeah?
Yeah.
Great.
I'm wondering how much empty business space we already have, like with, what is it, Strunk and White or whatever is empty. There's places in the business park that are empty, and that strip mall that's empty. Like, we have a lot of empty business space already that isn't being utilized, so I wonder if we're overestimating the capacity of business space that we can have.
That's a really important point.
I love the idea of mixed-use housing. It's been around for decades, and I love the idea, but
No, but you have commercial vacancies in town, right? And that's something you're contending with, and I don't think that's a new thing either. I think that predates COVID, et cetera. I'm going to ask Chris to chime in, and I promise I will get to both of you, if that's all right.
Yeah, I think that is an excellent point. And I think that what we've heard and anecdotally from what we've seen, that a lot of those empty or struggling spaces around town are not what we would classify in the market as Class A. You know, they're not exactly top of the line. They're not exactly the best maintained spaces. A lot of the ones that are having the hardest time are the ones that are a little bit older, a little bit out of date, that, you know, maybe don't have owners or landlords that are actively maintaining. And so absolutely recognize that there is vacancy locally, but what we are seeing, and we'll talk about this obviously in a little bit, what we are seeing is that there is some latent demand from Groveland residents and from surrounding towns as well, because there are not a lot of options for office space locally, certainly for retail locally.
I just want to bring up what Chris had presented the first time, and looking at regional look at demand side. What is possible within Groveland? What the 5-year or so outlook is? That small condo, office, and light industrial are, you know, for the entire town of Groveland over the next 5 years, if I get that, or 10 years. Sorry, it says right on the
10
slide.
years, yeah.
Is only about 5,000 square feet. So I think your inclination towards keeping it small is probably right. Right. That's why we're trying to keep this footprint, you know, relatively small, among many other reasons, but also being realistic about expectations of, you know, we can show you big buildings. That's probably not right for the site, and it's probably not right, you know, for what you have all said you want or don't want on the site. I'll leave it at that. Yeah. I think I saw yours first. Yep.
Quick thing that this young lady brought up about the square, real quick, as an aside. With George Cullen's Gas and Freddy's Diner and Stock and Kronk, I think that the problem happened a few years ago when they redid the new bridge, the base bridge, and they took all the parking spaces out of the square. There's no parking spaces down there, and it's like a speedway going through there. But that's, again, it's another issue that's going to be addressed in the future, maybe after this is addressed at the 61 acres.
So the reason why, I would say, me personally, downtown Groveland is no longer a business district, or it's business savvy, is because when they redesigned the square and they put the elm trees in the park, they brought the park out into the roadway, it took the parking from the stores, it took all the parking, and it narrowed the town, so no one can go into a store and get something. It made it too hard for people to go down there and shop. So what happened is the businesses kept failing. So-
But there's municipal parking over by, there is municipal parking right across the street from that
I understand there's
park,
municipal parking,
Bill.
but no one's gonna wanna walk in a rainstorm from the municipal parking lot down to Jerry's to get something.
It's a
just
block.
not-
I walk it all the
It's not set up
time.
right for business, that's all I'll say.
It's a block.
I'll offer that on-street parking does do a lot for retail businesses. There's no question on that, right? On-street parking really does reinforce the downtown. We are not here to talk, nor have I ever really looked at downtown besides walking through it once or twice and driven through it. So I can't really speak on it, right? But on-street parking is certainly part of these schemes. You know, it reinforces sort of an urban type feel, even though, you know, this is in no way trying to build a city. But build a little village is really what we're trying to get after here. All right. I want to talk through a little bit about zoning and how the town might get there before we dig into these schemes too. And I can go back a few if you want, but it's on Emily.
When's my way out?
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Excellent. All right, so this is a town-owned property, but even though it is a town-owned property, it is still zoned, right? You don't have unzoned property. So what we want to do with you today is, as we understand from, you know, your input today, as we understand from the responses to the community survey, is to try and figure out what zoning changes would be needed. So there's two things that would have to happen if this were going to be developed. One is the town would have to dispose of some or all of the land for development, and the other is the zoning would then control how that land is developed. So there's different ways of setting up the zoning to give a nice balance for what developers want to do and what the types of controls that the town wants for that sort of development. So zoning changes can require that the uses be clustered in the areas, as Brian's been discussing. There can be design guidelines, which could be as simple as advisory guidelines, or they could rise to the level of mandatory development standards. We could look at something called a form-based code, which also gives a community a lot of control over design. And so thinking as you all think about where these pieces are on the property in terms of the different scenarios, also keep in mind how you might want it to look. Even though it won't be seen from the street, the way this is set back as a deep buffer, and by the way, that would have to be either in the zoning or in the disposition of the land. When people come onto the property, do you want it to have a contemporary feel? Do you want it to have a classic New England feel? We would think about, this is very much a campus, so we would think about, okay, if there's going to be development of multiple buildings on the site, how do they relate to each other? So your input today is going to give us some insight into how that's going to work. And that is not, there we go. Sorry, went a little bit too far. It didn't have the responsiveness I thought. So when we think about development precedents, we think about the types of requirements we might have. So for example, the integration of the community trails with the development. I mentioned the way it looks. What type of uses are you allowing? Zoning will control that. So the different ones that Brian talked about, but that again, if you're going to do dining, do you allow outdoor dining? What does it mean? How do you think about noise controls? And even in an area that is far away from, relatively far away, when you look at the position of the sites. If you think about housing, what types of housing do you want to see? We talked about these smaller scales of housing. Townhouses clustered together, maybe some smaller scale mixed use where we have the apartments or the condominiums on the top. Zoning doesn't typically speak to ownership models, just sort of how the buildings look and what the use is. Considering that mix of community uses, the non-revenue generating uses with the revenue generating uses and how they work together on a single site. With that, I'm going to turn back over to the market, and I think we're doing the how-to at the end, or did you want me to cover that as the RFP process as well? Okay. Now? Sorry, at the end.
I think at the end.
Okay, beautiful. Sorry, I was running off my feet earlier today, so I can coordinate that bit.
It's all right. With that, I mean, we're about on schedule there. I'm going to assume, or I shouldn't assume. Chris, is there anything major that you wanted to share on market analysis, or where we're headed in terms of refining these schemes post tonight and what a fiscal impact assessment does?
Certainly, yeah, I can talk a little bit about those things. So obviously, we at RKG conducted a market analysis, and that's how we reached the conclusions on this slide. There's also some influence here from things that we've heard from people in the community and various stakeholders. As Brian mentioned before, this is not the proposed development scheme. This is just what we hear is desired in the case of the community center and recreation, and combining that with some of the revenue generating uses that the market will support in Groveland, according to our analysis. As Brian just alluded to, we are going to take this a step further, certainly. Once there is a little bit more clarity on a scheme, a development program, we're going to use that to conduct a fiscal impact analysis, which will essentially tell you, based on the uses that you've decided you want on this site, what are the impacts on the town's budget. So what are each of the uses chosen going to demand in terms of services? What is that going to cost on an annual basis? And how much are they going to generate from a property tax revenue standpoint? So you'll be able to understand the balance for each of these uses, which can help you understand how you want to prioritize the uses too. If you find out that light industrial winds up making you much more money per square foot than, say, a small or condo office, then the zoning might skew towards favoring that type of use, or the disposition process could respond more favorably towards those uses as well. So we'll base that analysis on a combination of as much of the town's data as we can get our hands on, and then some other expert sources that we have to get a clearer picture of what each of these potential uses might mean for the town's bottom line.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
So, with that, I'm hoping to huddle around some plans and talk honestly about what we've got before you, what you'd like to see on the site and how that might fit physically on the site. I'm going to propose that we do it in a few tables in small groups, if you don't mind huddling together. And then we'll have a 15 or so minute report out, thoughts and conclusions. And then we'll talk through what the next steps are for us, what the next steps are for the town, where we're headed over the rest of the summer. Anything quick as a big group before we break into small groups? No? Great. I think so. I feel bad that we printed big sheets, but I expected 200 people.
The west side, which is all that. And then I guess that here is right. Because that's how I found out about this.
No, but oh yeah, the world's gonna end 4 years from now. That's why the Everglades.
It brings traffic. I understand that.
But the Everglades is like I think that's what they do. Yeah, that's all. So I get that. Yeah.
Well,
Groundwater, yes, lovely, we just enjoy walking there and take our bikes.
I don't think anybody likes Fortnite.
It's like, as far as I know,
I'm gonna reach out, but I still want, we've been talking about that. Yeah, since the beginning of the.
There's nothing left here.
This is, it's not been a
that's the,
I think. Everyone wants to walk around. No, think about in Georgetown at that cute.
Yeah, I know.
And the light of the building and then the ice cream.
So, I mean, that's just where we're at. So what do you think of that? You don't like this one, why not?
I think it was, as mentioned before, and actually.
Well, no, but it says it has to be yeah, I know. Maybe, but I don't know.
I've never been this before.
I mean,
People will build the property. Just by putting a wagon in there.
Yeah, they're gonna see the brewery and be like,
stones,
I've never understood the shape.
Oh, well.
I know it was obviously part of the community trail
Natural
process.
heritage endangered species program.
That's the shape.
You are, because if you make a community.
Acres of land, it's just the other one.
Once you build.
Right, and then you have the real trails around.
I like that one.
And make it.
One of the reasons I like coming up with
Because
the house was 1868, so I didn't build.
Yeah, I guess what is missing from this that you like about it?
well, I like it because it's minimal.
Like I said, once it's gone, once it's the house or anything on it.
Admittedly, this has, 70 or so parking spaces, which is way more than we need. Those could be gravel, for this type of use, there's no real need to pave that type of work. We can put 70 in there, to grow the other schemes, really, this one would not need that. I didn't know, I heard it was coming, I just didn't know if you had a placement. If you did, then we just.
They can only have one here, so it's so,
It's the noise, it's very loud. And then, once you build them, everything we've been doing with those last 5 years, so if people want the light, as soon as you build them, you're gonna put lighting, which comes with many other issues. You get A, electricity, B, zero is an option. There is an option there, that we are not tasked to do. That is not our, not doing that.
Does anyone else like this one besides me?
I guess the other thing I did not mention.
I didn't say I like it.
The entire site is within the zone 2 wellhead protection district, or the existing zone 2 that is north of the site.
What I'm saying is, there is a way, I heard them say,
They're doing test pits everywhere. This is
colonial, like a colonial
in the next
site.
year or two, there will be a well.
There's a way we can do
next
it.
woods.
Today, people,
Have supplemental.
people.
Yeah, then they're gonna have a new, well, here would be the new.
It's just
Today,
another
they go
100
somewhere
foot zone.
and they walk and they enjoy it. That's where this needs to go.
the destination.
A destination, what are we gonna go see there? So
I don't know that the water sewer commission,
Because I thought there was wells on conservation restricted.
it could be. It could be. To be on a map was right in that neck of the woods, right at Screwing.
They killed it, they killed it.
So you feel good, I mean, even if.
Oh, yeah, I just say I like it.
No, that's okay.
And the good shot was dead.
I don't think there's a lot in there, it seems like where.
The only thing you have to think about, I know,
The small, and any of the small, semi-woody, semi-hardy, plants that thrive after really, really sandy soil.
Joining meeting timeout, or I've never seen this message before.
Network connection.
It plays well with the meadow.
The Wi-Fi here stinks. fixed by the way.
Yeah, I can't control that. We're fixing that next week with our own network, but I've complained about it for
There's no internet.
13 years. There is, they just won't give it to anyone. It's a secure town network. And then there's that. Do you have anything else still to present?
No. Let's see. Let me just double check. I don't. We don't. Community engagement. I mean, yeah, it was just closing slides. Which
Try
is nothing.
reconnecting, or-
But no, I can't. There's no like it's not even showing.
down.
Yeah, like there's
That's
no
'cause they're
internet.
using 30-year-old technology here. I mean, we put in a fiber network, but we didn't put in an access point because we didn't envision having like a smart display when we were designing all of that.
Yeah.
And we don't want people on our network, but now we want to do all this interactive technology. So we're adding that.
Can you just open the PDF and share your screen? Since I sent it to you.
But I don't have it. I checked my email. I haven't gotten it.
Oh.
Maybe try resending it.
I can't because now I'm not on the Wi-Fi. So.
that? I don't. Nope. It's all good. Oh, you gotta pick it out. How did you do that? Whatever. That's all.
He's sharing from his
Got it. I think it is green, thank you. So, thank you all very, very much, really. We've got about 5 minutes left. I've heard a few things from this table, a few things from this table. I didn't hear much from this table just because I didn't happen to stop here. What were some of the big themes? That I'm going to offer some of that I heard, that housing is not everyone's favorite use for this site, and if it is, it's probably not what we've drawn. It's probably not the townhouses that are on the boards. I think that's probably right. So I've also heard a lot of support for breweries, right, or a place to eat and drink and get to and stay, a cat cafe. But other food and drink establishments that get you to stop and linger and spend some time and spend some money. I didn't hear a whole lot about this idea of other light industrial, not noxious, but relatively small, if not no trucks, that type of delivery type services uses. Those fit in this footprint. They might be not too out of scale and character with the place. Any other uses or things that ring true or yeah.
Community center.
Yep.
Community center / library, definitely.
Yeah, a very, very good idea here to combine the community center with the library type use. I also heard a pretty loud and very poignant point towards there is no scheme zero that we're presenting. There's no option where we're conserve it all and don't. That's not what we're scoped or tasked to do, but it is another option. Okay, please.
I like Frog Pond and Boston Common, a nice little area to skate in the wintertime.
Garden Place, you could build one. They're hard to build. It requires a lot of water to do. The Olmsted Brothers, yeah. Any other major closing points before we take these? We're going to synthesize these, please.
No, I just think going forward, I think that what you just said and what you've heard, that people don't want housing, right? I don't think the area calls for housing. I definitely think going forward that Groveland really needs to get industrial, not in this site, someplace else, possibly north or south of Groveland, and zero this property in once we come up with an idea. And I really think it needs to be tied with the rail trail, where we're gonna get people off the rail trail to come in, that wanna go in with their family, or they wanna drive in with their family, and they come in for a reason, for Saturday, Sunday. We'll just go down to Groveland or whatever, we'll go down to, whatever they call it, we'll go in there, we can get an ice cream, we can do whatever, you know what I mean? As I was saying to this lady here, you have up in Salem, New Hampshire, you have the Tuscan Market, and I know this is 17 acres and that's whatever. A smaller scale, Rockporty with some shops down below possibly, maybe geared toward art, antique, whatever. And again, having a reason to pull people into the site, and it's gonna still help us with revenue, and it's gonna put us on the map that Groveland's something, and then leaving the outer skirts, as I said to her, maybe they can subdivide it, maybe they can subdivide the outside of it, and let that go to conservation back to restricted, and just keep the 17 acres subdivided for this reason, and now it protects, you know what I mean, the outer skirts to stay where it is.
Just look at the pictures that are on the perimeter of this room in Town Hall, nice old pictures out there. I think Dr. Woodbury or something took, and there's very, showed you the history of town and what it was like, one of it was the pines over here.
Yeah.
Years ago, but maybe some of those things could be restored and brought back to the site down there.
Good to know.
61 acres.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
Mind, though, that the property was purchased primarily to protect our water. And water is becoming a more increasingly rare and valuable resource that we continue to take for granted, even though we know we shouldn't. And I just can't be emphatic enough about future generations will thank us if we protect our water supply to the best of our ability. Right now is the time to really think it through, not just to jump at all different kinds of possibilities, but really think through how we can manage maybe a lot of goals at the same time, but always keeping in mind that water protection is paramount.
Important.
Once it's developed, it's done.
Can't ever get it back.
You don't.
True.
Agreed. with that, really, thank you very much. I hear that point loud and clear. I hope we did really hear that very loud and clear the first time too. We are trying to really limit the scale and impact on the site. So we're going to take that forward, and you know, certainly from this, the team develops a preferred scheme, a way to go forward. Looks at the financial impacts of that, presents that back to you again, and maybe has some alternates, maybe has some, you know, various ways you can go about doing it. But we'll certainly keep that in mind. I hear that loud and clear. Thank you.
Yeah, you have Gila Brook and Johnson Creek over there, so those are great part of our aquifer, so you might want to think how we can protect those too.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. I mean, you've got
We used to go fishing there for catfish, I don't know if you can do.
over in the Mill Pond there.
No, Johnson Creek.
Oh, in Johnson, yeah.
There's the bottom feeders.
Don't they have otters over there? I heard there are otters in that little.
Oh, they're really?
Yeah.
Nice.
For real.
I gotta get out there more.
Well, with that, that is about the time for the evening. Anybody else online got anything? I think it's the same folks. So with that, I truly do want to thank you for your time. This is, you know, it's really important stuff. I really appreciate you coming out tonight in person and joining us on this. That we will be making these available on the website. We'll be putting, you know, there's a project website that's available through the town's website. If you know of others that haven't heard about this yet, please, you know, our contact information is on there. I'm happy to have phone calls or check-ins with folks who didn't feel like they heard about this along the way. And look forward to hear from you again next time we're out. So thank you very much.